There is simply no real evidence that a calorie surplus is required to gain muscle. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. And this has come up. I've had people who say, Jason, but you used to promote traditional bulks and cuts. You used to say they were the way to go, all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, I said that a long time ago because I actually believed it. But guess what? There's this thing called science. There's these things called studies where we study athletes and lifters and we see what happens in the lab with modern equipment where we can measure it. Okay? When we can really accurately measure stuff and we look at it in a systematic manner, there's a lot of things that people need to think about. So we look at some of these studies that have been done, and people will even pretend like a 10% surplus is like a conservative bulk. Do you know that when studies on 10% surplus were done, in lifters, right? Like with good programming, good nutrition, they gained way more fat than muscle. It was mostly fat. And when people were given extremely small calorie surpluses, I'm talking it was something stupid like a 3% surplus. You can barely measure that. Okay, you ready? Those same studies, they gained just as much muscle, but they didn't gain all that fat. Okay, let that sink in for a moment. Almost a nearly zero surplus, barely enough to even register, caused just as much muscle growth as a 10%. Now, 10% for most people is about a 300, calorie surplus or whatever. That's not a lot. It's very, very small. Okay, do we see the issue here? All they did was gain a lot more fat. Okay, so even on a 10% surplus, the people gained mostly fat. Now, you'll get the argument, yeah, but okay, so they gained more fat, but they can always cut it down, and if they lose some of it, they have muscle memory. Yeah, you have all that, but you don't have to gain it to begin with. That was the point, is that, when you look at that data, what was it showing? It wasn't like they gained more muscle, and that's what people forget. No one's talking about leverage advantage from fat gain and water and all that, because that still isn't translating to more muscle. It's translating to lifting weights easier due to a leverage advantage from the fat in the squish. Okay, it's not translating into more muscle growth or more stimulus. So when you look at all that, they're gaining the same muscle, but one of them gains like 5 times more body fat. Keep in mind that's very conservative. So herein lay the problem with that. Showing it's not necessary for maximum growth to have a significant surplus. Now, when people say, yeah, but it's hard to gain, like if you try to do that, you might accidentally hit maintenance, and then you wouldn't make any gains, except that that's not true either, is it? Okay, it's not really true either. So this whole idea of, the wheel spinning, right? We're going to have all this wheel spinning. If you do this, you're going to spin your wheels. But does that happen in the lab? Does that happen when we study athletes? No. How oftentimes have we had studies on already trained lifters, like people squatting, 400 plus pounds? How many studies have we had on that stuff where at maintenance calories they gained muscle and lost fat? Plenty of them. Oh man. Plenty of them. So what this tells us is what? We don't have actual evidence that a surplus is required for maximum growth. We know it's not required for some growth. We know if protein is high and training is dialed in really well and you're resting, what happens? Surplus isn't required to gain muscle at all. You'll just recomp a little bit. Okay? Same thing when we bring over the topic of the surplus. A very small surplus causes maximum growth. All right, you see where we're going with this? In other words, it's not necessary to make significant changes in body weight. You don't need to gain body weight probably even at the rate you're capable of gaining muscle unless you're really lean. Okay? And that's my point. My point is anybody who's 15% or higher body fat probably never should even be thinking about gaining weight. You don't have to be gaining weight to maximize growth. That person can probably recomp just fine. Now here's the argument. Like, well, what about the wheel spinning? Have you considered that maybe those people their training isn't good? They're not training hard. Their training's not dialed in. They're not training correctly. That's usually what it is, because the research always shows they gain when it's good programming. Right? The other thing, how much of it is people are calling wheel spinning when that's just the rate that natural drug-free lifters gain when they're not gaining a bunch of fat to get leverage from the fat. That's what people also aren't figuring out. They're like, well, the wheels spin. It's like, oh, you gained slow, really slow. But if you're not a rank novice anymore and you're not on drugs, that's normal. Do you really think that wheel spinning wouldn't exist if you bulked faster? It'd be the same thing. The only difference is maybe the numbers on things like the squat and bench would go up because of the fat leverage. But is that really not wheel spinning? Is wheel spinning just because you're gaining muscle as fast as the body will gain it as a, non-novice drug-free lifter? That have guys considered that maybe it's just really slow? That without any gear, it probably takes 7 to 10 years to get pretty dang big. To get to a pretty reasonable amount of muscle, if you're actually natural and completely natty, or just on something like true TRT only, is actually a really slow process. It takes a really long time. Stop comparing yourself to guys on gear for your standards, or stop comparing yourself to your noob gains. That's the problem. You're not wheel spinning. And here's how much of it's the wheel spinning. You want to know what I find causes wheel spinning? The worst wheel spinning I've ever seen is the guys who overbulk. Ooh, why? Because then they start feeling fat and then they cut. Now, keeping in mind, if we go off the data, the overbulking didn't cause extra muscle growth. All it did was make them fat. So they gained muscle at the same rate that they would have had they just lean bulk super slow, but with a bunch of fat. So what happens when they gain the fat? They now have to spend time cutting. Like, oh, I got too fat, I got to cut. Uh-oh. So they just took time away from making progress to cut. Number one. Number two, impatient people who bulk too fast cut too fast. They don't cut 1 pound a week. People who gain 20 pounds of extra fat and then freak out and want to cut, they try to lose it all in 6 weeks. So then they lose all the muscle that they gained. So let's say they spent 6 months bulking too fast. They gained 25 too many pounds. They try to cut it all in 6 weeks. Well, they waste the 6 weeks cutting, and then they lose all the muscle growth they had because they end up losing several pounds of muscle, right? Because they gained, 5 pounds of fat for every pound of muscle they gained. It's the end result. They just threw away 8 months. They're back to where they were 8 months before. It's stupid. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.